Hello, hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here on time. Happy Friday to you. I'm seeing that we might be missing participants today, so we're going to give it a few more minutes. So just bear with us, and then we'll get started with some of our housekeeping items for jumping in. In the meantime, though, for those of you that are online, if you want to add to the maybe your name and your love to hear from you, and then we'll get started in a few minutes. Okay, so in the interest of time, it is now 12:05, so I think we can get started. Before we jump in, I just want to take a moment to review instructions for anyone who might need Spanish interpretation today. If you do, we do have an interpreter on the line. Follow the prompts on the screen to access the interpretation. And then next slide. In case anyone is on a mobile device, these are also the instructions. For the most part, I think everyone on today speaks English, so we can breeze through this, but just in case. And then lastly, next slide, please. These are the instructions to access the actual presentation and PowerPoint in Spanish, fully translated. You can toggle up above on your screen between two of the presentations that are being shown. And then next slide, please. These are the instructions for a mobile device on how to do it. It looks a little differently, um, but relatively easy once you get the hang of it. Okay, great. So with that, we will officially get started. I want to welcome everyone to the first of the three-part series of our Incubator for the Participatory Grant Making Initiative application. We're really glad that you've expressed interest in submitting a proposal. My name is Denise Brom, Senior Program Manager with the L4E team, which is the official education arm of Rising Communities. I'm really looking forward to collaborating with you in this space and also helping you get one step closer to submitting your proposal through the development of your scope of work, of your strategic plan. So before we get into more things, what you can expect from today's workshop is really that we're going to dive into the SMART goals framework, using this framework to support you in creating a clear and concise scope of work. And really, what to do is serve as a foundation of your PGMI application. Goal is that by the end of the session, you'll have both the language and also examples that you can use directly in your proposal as next slide, please. Great. So our objectives for today's session are one, we're going to review best practices for strategic planning, while also practicing how to write really strong, SMART goals. We're also going to talk about how those goals relate to more broadly systems and policy change. And then finally, we'll walk through how these elements will support you in driving the narrative component of your application. So everything we discussed today, keep in mind, it's really to help you in your application and in submitting it with confidence. I am going to set up a couple of prompts during today's session where I do invite you to drop in some of your draft some of these components in the chat and maybe we can have conversations about it. Again, it's not mandatory, but it's just meant to be a space where we can all learn together and kind of support each other. So next slide. So now we're going to jump in. Before we dive into the SMART goals framework, I really want to hone in on and start us off through strategic planning. So in relation to the PGMI application that you're all interested in submitting, the strategic plan really serves as the foundation of your goals and of your scope of work. So what does a strategic plan look like, right? Essentially, it's meant to help come up with a broad statement that demonstrates what is that you are hoping to accomplish in your work. So when you're writing a proposal, what we want to see on our end are that your goals are linked directly to the needs of community members in South LA. In other words, the needs statement that you stating in your proposal. And so as you do this, we really ask you to think about your why, right? What change is it that you're trying to make? And when you do that, a word of advice is really using clear words to demonstrate this. So words such as increase, provide, establish. This really shows us that your project is concrete, also measurable, and that it's achievable. So there's two examples on the screen of really strong need statements that really encompass larger goals. So the first one is to decrease the degree of malnutrition among young children in South LA by 2023. And then number two is to provide 1,000 meals to homeless individuals from September 1, 2021 to August 31, 2022. So as promised, I'm going to add a quick prompt in the chat to get us to really think through this. And if anyone has a draft of their overarching goal, please drop it in the chat now. If you don't, that's totally okay. You can use base, you can use however is most fitting to you. So I'll give it a second before we move on. And feel free to work through that as we go through these various aspects of the presentation today. We will be providing the PowerPoint and the recording in case you miss something or you want to reference this at a later time. So next slide, please. So what's the purpose of a strategic plan, right? Overall, this is simply about creating a roadmap for your work. So it helps you and your organization get clear about where you're going, why it matters, and how it is that you're going to get there. So when we strategic, really think of as being intentional, right? That's truly what we mean. So not just reacting to what comes up day to day, but taking time to think ahead. And when we say planning, we're talking about laying out the specific steps and strategies that will move you and your organization towards the goals that you've set out. So when thinking about your strategic plan, you're able to incorporate the various facets that drive your organization or what you see on the screen. So your mission, your vision, the themes that drive your work, your goals, and then actions taken to achieve them. So if you think about strategic planning, think about it as your organization's story of how you're going to turn your vision into actions step by step. So with that, we're going to go to the next slide, please. So now we're going to start to look at process, right? Which is essentially what it actually takes to move from the planning phase into action. I do want to preface this by just reminding all of us, which I know we're pretty much aware, but strategic planning isn't something that you do once and kind of forget about. Typically, it's an ongoing iterative that helps you stay grounded, organized, and adaptable to changing environments, changing goals, changing funding streams, for example. And so when you think about your strategic plan for your proposal, these are some of the components that we ask you to think about to help ground your responses. One is your mission, right? So start with your why. What are you trying to achieve and for whom? Why is it that your organization exists, right? So this is meant to be the heart of your plan, and it should connect directly to the community priorities that you've identified as well. Next, we think about the objectives, right? So we'll stay on that screen. Yes, thank you. We'll think about the key results that essentially show and demonstrate fulfilling your mission, right? So these are big aims or outcomes that essentially tell you and us that you are on the right track to fulfill that overarching goal and your mission. Next, we think about your strategies, right? So this is essentially your how. What actions, what partnerships, and what approaches will help you reach your objectives. This is essentially where you describe that you're going to use, right, to make your impact real. And so once these three components come together, it's meant to provide more clarity for you in your plan that you can that next phase you see on the screen, which is the action plan. So the action plan really comes after your strategies are clear and you map out your plans, whether it's in the short term or the long term. But we ask you to think about, in a feasible sense, what is it that you accomplish in the next 90 days? What's something that you can accomplish within the term of the grant, for example, and who's going to be responsible for what component of seeing that through? Implementation wise, this is where we ask you to essentially work your plan, right? So carry out the steps that you've designated and then make sure that everyone's aware of their role and carrying out the various tasks. And lastly, we see the monitoring and evaluation piece, right? This is essentially where we ask you to think about how you'll check in and determine how your plan is going. Are you seeing the results that you expected? Are there things that need to shift and course correct, right? So think about strategic planning not about being perfect and designing this perfect program or perfect plan, but more so being flexible and responsive to both community and then changing environment. So we really hope to see a lot of these elements reflected in your scope of work, in your application, and hopefully these various components will help you think about how you respond to that, right? Again, this process is meant to help you communicate your project aims, your goals, the measurable outcomes, and your evaluation plan, but of course, written within your own voice and representing your organization's voice as well. Alrighty, so we'll move to the next slide. Thank you. So, what are the benefits of planning, right? We don't just do this for the sake of doing it. And I really want to uncover with you all what it is that this helps us achieve. So, when we take time to step back and strategically plan, we're doing more than just writing goals on paper, right? We're essentially setting up ourselves and our organizations up for success. And from that success stems clarity. So, strategic planning essentially defines your organization's purpose, right? And it reminds everyone, all players, whether it's staff, partners, funders, or community members, what it is that you stand for and why it is that your work matters. It also just helps anchor your mission and your focus, especially when we go through periods of being very busy and kind of experiencing challenges. It's also meant to help establish realistic goals and objectives that align with your mission, right? I know a lot of us maybe have a lot of passions and have all of these ways that we want to help and shift the system, in the community, but staying focused is a way to really help us make sure that we're able to see something through, right? And not get too caught up in kind of like the dream stage or like the strategy stage. This is what we're going to look for in your applications, right? Not just goals that are inspiring, but also doable within your capacity, within the timeline of the grant, and within the budget. Um, Additionally, a strategic plan is going to help you communicate your goals and objectives clearly to us. The intention is that you are going to have language that very concisely speaks about your work, explains your goals, not just to us, but also, to your board, to community members, right? So this is something that can help beyond just this application. It also helps develop a sense of ownership across your organization or team. We find that when everyone contributes to a plan, people tend to feel more connected to the mission, and that drives more impact and positive results. Shared ownership is really powerful. I know that at Rising Communities, we tend to work and operate under that premise, and it is very powerful. And then lastly, strategic planning helps to ensure the effective use of your organization's resources, right? So, out of all the things that you could possibly do with your time, this is meant to help focus and hone in on how you'll use your time, your budget, and your energy on what really matters most or your key priorities. And that's definitely something that we want to see is the intentionality behind using these funds, right, with a purpose. So, again, as a reminder, as you think about putting together your application for PGMI, we really ask you to consider not just as meeting this requirement for the application, but really demonstrating that your organization has a strong foundation, a very clear direction in terms of the work that you're going to be doing, and also a plan to create lasting community impact. And with that, we'll go ahead and move into SMART goals. So as we move through this presentation today, we're now going to shift into using this lens of policy and systems change through objective setting. And next slide, please. Alrighty, so while your goal and your overarching kind of like strategic plan delineates what it is that you and your organization are going to do, objectives kind of turn that on its head and demonstrate how it is that you are going to achieve that. So next slide, please. Perfect. So process objectives essentially are used to describe what you'll actually do to reach goals. So these can encompass the activities and the steps that make your project happen within the day-to-day. So in other words, think of it this way. Your big picture want to accomplish, but your process objectives describe the actions that will get you there. If your goal is to increase physical activity among older adults in South LA, some of your might look like one, conduct outreach to 300 residents in the neighborhood, and then two, enroll 75 of them in at least one fitness class or activity. So these are really clear and measurable actions, and they show progress even before your long-term outcomes happen, right? So in your proposal, process objectives are essentially where you show us that you have a practical plan set in motion and you're demonstrating not just what it is you're going to do, but how you're going to achieve it. Taking this a step further, thank you, is essentially impact objectives. So now that we've covered the steps and activities that make your project move forward, right, with the process, we are now shifting and talking about how it is that those activities will make a change or difference in the community. Essentially, impact objectives answer the question of how will things be better because of the work that I've done or that my organization has done. So the key differences are process objectives, think about them as far as what you're going to do, while impact objectives are what will change as a result of carrying out those activities. So some of the examples on the screen are, say your process objective was the one that I brought up earlier about enrolling 75 older adults in fitness activities. Your impact objective might be something like participants will report lower blood pressure, reduced stress, and improved well-being at the end of the first year. And that's essentially impact, right? It's the outcome or the difference that shows that your work mattered and that something occurred as a response to the activities that you did. So in your application, we'll go back to the previous slide. Thank you. So in your application, impact objectives are especially important because we want to understand not just the activities that you've outlined for the term or how you'll do them. And while those are important, we want to understand the intended results of those activities and essentially what will be different for the community that you serve and the participants of your programs. So I am going to include another prompt in the chat, and I am going to pause because I want to give folks an opportunity if you've drafted anything, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I would like for you to take maybe one of your goals or one of your organization's goals and write down a process objective and the impact objective behind that. Um, Include it in the chat if you feel comfortable. If not, I think it's a good exercise for you all to follow along if you're maybe writing notes down, because these are essentially the types of things that we want to see reflected in your application. So we'll take a minute and see if anyone feels brave enough to add to the chat or maybe even come off mute. Okay, so I'm not seeing much movement in the chat, which is okay. I hope that means that you're all taking some time to really think through, what your response might be to some of these things. So that's totally fine. We'll keep moving on. Next slide, please.
I'll give you one real quick if you need some participation.
Sure, yeah, that'd be great. And I also
Okay.
just saw some movement in the chat, so we'll spend some time on this.
Okay.
Go
So
ahead,
I
go ahead.
I just wanted to say because we do like food distribution and other things like that. Just a quick little sentence that healthy eating will also assist in reducing health issues. Does that
Definitely.
work?
Yeah. Healthy eating, the systems change and the goal right there really is around turning around health outcomes and improving
Hmm.
health outcomes for populations. That's 100% correct. Thank you
Okay.
for that. I see that Tina. Oh, did somebody else want to share?
Yes, I was actually going to say one of our goals is to make sure that we distribute food throughout the region as well as locally in SPA 6.
Yes. I love that's a really wonderful, again, like broad goal. And I'm really going to be excited to read into your process and impact objectives beyond that, right? So thank you for that. I see that added in the chat potential is increase access for Compton residents to culturally affirming behavioral health services. Yes, 100%. That's a great goal, right? Like really specific. Thank you all for your contributions. That's a really start. So we're going to go ahead and keep moving through our presentation today. So now that we've talked about goals, process objectives, and impact objectives, we're going to take a look at what it really means to write a SMART goal and use this framework. So SMART really is meant to function as a framework, right? So it's meant to help you formulate a goal, formulate plans by kind of answering all of these different aspects with the goal of helping you create goals that are super strong and clear and funder ready. So as you think about maybe refining your broad goal, refining your impact and processes, your strategic plan, really lean on the SMART framework, and hopefully you'll find that it helps you in that process to kind of be very clear and concise and not stray away from maybe like adding too much fluff, right? That might not be needed. So I really like it, and I've used this a lot in my practice. But essentially, S stands for specific, right? So be very clear and concrete about what you want to do. And whenever possible, avoid broad language like improve community health, right? So instead, think like provide monthly wellness workshops for 100 residents, right? Or some of the examples earlier were we will provide assistance for X number of residents, right? And so the difference is that within the umbrella of community health, there's so much that we could do and tackle, right? We don't know if it's that you're going to offer wellness workshops or it's that you're going to offer food. And there's a difference. So being very clear and concise really helps. Is for measurable. So as you formulate your goal, think about how this is going to be measured and how you're going to define and demonstrate success. So, what are the data or numbers or observations that you will show us that demonstrate that you've made progress to achieve your goal, right? Maybe for you, it's attendance to something. Maybe it's survey completion. Maybe it's the number of families or children that are served. So we really want to see in your application that you are formulating the way that you're going to measure your program so that we know when it is that you've reached your goal. A is for achievable. So again, I know that there's so many pressing community issues and we wish that we could solve them all, but we really need to make sure that we're setting goals that are realistic, right? Given time constraints, given the term of this grant, given the resources at your disposal, your staff capacity, your capacity. And so it is okay to start small and scale up later, right? We really just want to see a thorough plan that was very intentional and that's achievable. We appreciate that honesty and practicality when we see it in applications. So hopefully that's reassuring for you that, you know, we stick within the of achievable goals. R is for relevant. So make sure your goal connects to your organization's missions and also to community priorities, which I'm sure you are already doing because you're aware of what it is that the community needs are and what some of those gaps might look like. If not, you wouldn't be, you know, seeking funding to move your program forward. So in other words, make sure that your goal really aligns with the region's needs, is equity focused, and that you're kind of demonstrating your does this goal truly move the needle on something that matters to our community, right? So think about that question. And then T is time bound. So give a clear timeline for your goal. When is it that you'll start? When will you finish, right? For this proposal, definitely consider the terms of the grant because that'll kind of help you set those realistic and achievable expectations and help give you confidence in achieving your goal, right? Because unfortunately, we don't have all the time in the world for this. It is time bound. So use that to your benefit as you plan your goal. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're going to dive into an example of a SMART goal, right? And what this might look like when applying the framework of SMART. So the goal that you see on the screen is we will partner with 75 partner organizations throughout the city to bring socio-emotional, physical health, and arts programs to 100 under-resourced schools that would otherwise be unable to provide their students with these enrichment activities by the end of year one. So that's pretty loaded, right? But what's wonderful is there's a ton of objectives kind of coming out of that goal. Some of them being the fact that 500 students, you know, might benefit from a range of programs and services, right? These are some of the objectives. Within that goal, 100 programs and services were connected to under-resourced schools, right, and partnered up. 80% of teachers will strongly agree that their students had support they otherwise have received because of the enrichment activities. And because of this goal and because of this work, 25 new program partners will be identified. And so when thinking about the SMART framework, right, this goal is very specific. It's listing numbers, it's listing very clear objectives that are measurable, right? There's numbers behind all of these things. It's also achievable, right? It's talking about how all these activities and objectives will essentially occur within 1 year's time. It's relevant because it's demonstrating that this is bringing enrichment in an equitable way to students. And it's also time bound because, again, it's demonstrating that these activities will occur by the end of year one. So if you ever write a goal, you can definitely kind of write it first and then compare it against the SMART goals, or you can work and fill out those different components to then help you draft up sentences for your goals. Whichever way you choose to, we definitely just recommend that you lean into this framework as it's going to help anchor your response, the design of your program essentially, right? Or what it is that you're hoping to do. Next slide, please. Great. So Now that we've discussed SMART goals and using that framework, we're also going to turn to a very important aspect of your project that's very near and dear to rising communities and our ethos and our approach to our work, and it's policy and systems change, otherwise known as PSC for short, which you might hear me use throughout the presentation. So essentially, in your proposal, right? We really ask you to think beyond the short term of your project and consider some larger questions, such as how does your work create lasting change in your community? In other words, our hope is that your work is not just providing a service, but that it's modeling a better way for systems to serve communities, right? And this is important in your application because, again, we're looking for lasting impact. Next slide, please. So policy and systems change essentially is about addressing root causes of inequities, right? Not just the surface level symptoms. So look at the chart on the screen. This is a really nice way of comparing activities or maybe actions, right, that do have an impact versus policy and systems change related activities that kind of go below the surface and promise more of that sustained change. So let's say like an event or program occurs, the difference is that that might be a one-time thing, right? Whereas policy and change really asks us to be ongoing in our work. Sometimes events and programs can be repetitive, right? So they result from short-term behavior changes or maybe only lead to short-term behavior changes, right? Whereas policy and systems change really offer to produce behavior change over time, right? That's lasting, that's sustained, that years from now we look and still see the fruits of labor and the changes that were made in the community essentially. Occur on the individual level, policy and systems change really lives in the community or population level. It's also part of an ongoing plan, right? So again, sustained. Think about the sustainability of this work in the long term. Whereas, other programs, projects, activities that don't lean into policy and systems change and address root causes are not really part of ongoing plans, are more short term and are difficult to sustain, right? And in other words, we don't really get to see a lot of the change in the long term, which change typically does take a while. So some of the guiding questions for policy and systems change that I would like for a lot of you to think of is how does your project address the underlying causes of the issues you're tackling, right? So let's say it's about bringing healthy foods to the underlying causes are possibly food deserts, right? Or environmental justice or certain factors that have essentially led to certain communities not having access historically to healthy foods and economically, right? It's also an economic issue. And so how is it that bringing healthy foods to the community and making them accessible, how is that addressing root causes, right? Who is at the decision-making table as well, right? So think about, are there ways for community members to be involved in decision-making? What changes in policy, practice, or culture do you hope to influence through your work? And how will your project set a model that others could adopt or build upon? And I do want to give a caveat for this section because we recognize like this is asking a lot, right? Like this is really asking us to think through how to solve some problems that might feel larger than life or that have just existed for a very long time. And so the goal isn't that we're asking you to solve the structural problem way to the end to where it disappears. I mean, that would be ideal. However, we really just want to see that you are showing that your work fits into the bigger picture of long-term community transformation, right? Again, long-term. We're not expecting every single thing to change overnight, but we want to understand how this builds into the larger puzzle and will kind of help that long-term sustained change that goes beyond the surface level, right? So I have another prompt for you guys. We're going to take 2 minutes. I'm going to ask you to think about your project. And consider what part of your work can spark bigger change in a policy, maybe a practice or a mindset, right? So jot down an example. And if you feel comfortable in the chat or if you want to come off and share, feel free. We'll take 1 to 2 minutes for you to take some time and reflect, and then we'll move on to the next section. So in the interest of time, is anyone does anyone feel semi-ready or prepared to drop something in the chat or come off mute? If not, it's okay. Like, I recognize this portion is kind of like what really causes us to reflect a lot more deeply. So you might not have this formulated yet, and that's totally fine. The goal is to get you thinking about it. So as long as you're doing that, then we've definitely achieved the goal for the session. Okay, great. So if anyone does draft anything, feel free to drop in the chat or you can stop me if it takes you a little bit longer. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next section. And this section is essentially your project, right? We've talked about SMART goals. We've talked about how you can connect your work to more broadly policy and system change. And now we're going to bring it all together in the project narrative section of your application and what this might look like in your proposal. Let me pause there. I do see Tina in the chat. Thank you, Tina. So Tina said, engaging X number of youth into an advisory body that informs BH programming at new BH facility in Compton. Purely theoretical, our group hasn't discussed in full yet. I love this. Yeah, this is definitely heading in the right direction because I think engaging youth tends to get overlooked sometimes, and having youth make up an advisory body where they're in the table or at the table to help with the decision making process really truly is inviting community in that decision making process, and it's disruptive to the way that systems have operated historically, right? So this is a wonderful example. And again, it's not like a lofty major thing that's like going to take out entire systems, right? It's kind of like adding your own grain, creating that advisory body that otherwise hasn't existed for the community and creating those opportunities for youth. So wonderful, wonderful example. Thank you so much for that. So with project narrative, this is essentially where you're going to tell your project's story, right? The what, the why, and the how of your work. And so this section is meant to be like a short overview, right? Think of it as your project's pitch. You're going to describe the issue that you're addressing. Why is it that it matters to your community, right? Why is it an issue? How are you going to respond to that issue? And then who will benefit and what results do you expect, right? So like, what are your anticipated results? And again, we can easily apply what's on the right here to that framework, right? Being very specific, having measurable effects, right? So 1 co-op building, 4 businesses, 10 pottery classes, 200 community members. Achievable. Relevant, right, to the needs of the community, and time bound. Moving on. Additionally, we really invite you to discuss your experience, right? So as leaders in the community, as folks who are already doing this work, share with us your knowledge of community issues, right? How you've identified what you've noticed in your work, why it matters, your experience with working with diverse communities, right? So we want to see that familiarity that you have of working in South LA and with South LA communities. again, that policy systems change experience and success. So maybe talk about ways that your organization has advanced policy or systems change already, right? And provide specific examples whenever possible. Next slide, please. And so, how this relates to your project is that, again, within your narrative, this is where we want all of these elements to come to life, right? We want to see your SMART goals, your objectives, your scope of work reflected here. So, what's the impact that you're going to have, right? Or that your project is going to have? Who are your partners? Think about who you can leverage that can help create, a very fruitful and transformative program. Community involvement, that's a big piece. That's something we tend to look for because a lot of our programming really emphasizes community involvement, right? They are why we do this work, and being historically marginalized, it's our responsibility in wielding power to bring them to a decision-making process. Taking it a step further, thinking about how they'll be involved in the design and implementation of your project, right? So not just involving them, but actually doing something with their involvement, operationalizing it, using the input, right? And seeing it reflected in the work, not just tokenizing their involvement. And truly, addressing anti-Blackness and racism and promoting racial equity through your work. That's really what we're, asking of folks. And that combating of anti-Blackness and racism again feeds into the larger policy and systems change transformative piece that I know is very critical to rising communities, to the work that we do as an organization, and then by extension the work that we're hoping to fund as well. I know we've covered a lot. um, and some of this might be redundant, right? Like I know I've mentioned a few times today that as much as possible, be clear outcomes and come up with outcomes that are achievable given all of the constraints. Um, but I just want to reassure you and like celebrate all of you that are taking the time to be in this session today, that we've gone through so much together in a short period of time. The SMART format, impact and process objectives, how to come up with a goal for your organization, answering the call of policy and systems change. And so if you've drafted one SMART goal today, if you've drafted any of the elements of the prompts in the chat, I just want to let you know you're halfway there, right? You can always adapt and refine your language, but in the thinking of this, you're already doing half of the work by creating a very intentional proposal that is answering a lot of these different aspects. So I know it's a lot, but I just want to celebrate you all in being in this space. Those of you who added to the chat or even came off mute, and I know you're working through the very early drafts, and that's okay, right? You might come up with 10 drafts of the same goal or the same objectives or the same evaluation metrics that you might use to demonstrate success. But again, if you remember, we talked about how a lot of this work is evolving and ongoing, right? Your strategic plan is meant to be a living document because unfortunately, the only thing we can expect in life is change, and things are going to change. Staff might change, the environment might change, capacity might change, priorities might change, right? And so this is meant to be something foundational for you to use as you navigate, right? And as things might shift so that you can keep your program at the forefront and ensure that you are always able to address any of the challenges that come up and demonstrate your outcomes and your successes, right? We want to see everybody win. So hopefully framework really helped situate that for you. Can we go to the next slide, please? Perfect. So before I open it up for questions, I just want to reiterate some of the things we talked about today. So we talked about strategic planning and how it gives your work direction and keeps you connected to your mission. And then we built out goal making into SMART goals in that framework, right? So beyond that, we moved into creating process objectives of how you're going to do something and the actions you're going to take to get there, or your impact objectives, right? What they're meant to do, the change that your work will make in the community. We also explored policy and systems change and how your projects can do more than deliver services, right? They really can shift systems, practices, mindsets towards a more equitable future. And so the ask is that as you move forward, proposals in your drafting, you think about this process, not just about checking off of completing your application to submit, right? This is meant to serve as a tool to strengthen the way that you plan, that your organization plans, that you measure, and that you communicate impact, and really showing that your work is grounded in community priorities and in creating sustainable change. So before we get into questions, I would love to hear from you all in the chat, or maybe even if you unmute, what is one thing that you're taking away from today, right? Maybe it's a SMART goal, maybe it's a clear next step for your scope of work, or a brand new idea on how you can formulate your proposal. Maybe it's a consideration about like policy and systems change more broadly that you hadn't thought about. So I invite you to share. And maybe it's none of those. Maybe it's something else that's like a lot more simple that you're taking away from the session today, but I'd love to hear from you. And apologies, my dog is like shaking behind me. I don't know if you guys heard that. But I'll open it up to questions in case anybody has any questions for me. And more broadly, if you have questions related to the grant proposal and the application and due date, I do have my colleagues on the line, Maisha Robinson, who's the program officer overseeing the grant, as well as Dr. Shondell Maxwell, who's also supporting. So I will open it up to just additional questions beyond today's presentation. And we did end a little early, so we have time to get to questions. If there's no questions, I have some resources to share with you all, an office hour information, and a survey to ask you to complete, but I'll pause there in case there's questions.
Oh, I just wanted to know, I don't know if I missed that part, but when will the application be released?
Yes, great question. So the application is live already. I can share the link to the Grant Vantage portal where you will essentially be submitting your application. And I just dropped that into the chat. So it is open. Submissions are due by November 21st at 5 p.m. And decisions will go out on February 27th. Maisha, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yes, thank you so much. So when you're submitting online through Grant Vantage, you must create an actual login for the platform to apply for this opportunity. You can also go to the platform if you need to change the language as well through your browser, but all applications will be accepted through Grant Vantage. The finalized date for your proposals are due November 21st at 5 p.m. If you have any other additional questions, I'll drop our email directly to me and through the program. So we'll get all the emails there and we'll answer any questions or concerns. And we'll also update the FAQ page so you can review as well.
Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, so I see some hands up in the chat. I'll go ahead with Tina.
Hi, what was helpful for me is, we were feeling a bit nervous about the, funders' directive to think about systemic change, but propose something that's only 10 months in duration. So that, had us a bit nervous, and then you're sort of trying to figure, does that work? So I feel like you helped with that in explaining that you need to show how the 10-month activity fits into a bigger picture of systemic change. So thank you.
100%. Yeah. Thank you for uplifting that. And, we are privy to the fact that this is 10 months, right? Like, there's really only so much that can happen. And so I'm happy that I reduced some of that maybe like present anxiety around that, it's more so about being reflective and taking a step back to think about how maybe the current services you're doing, how do they relate to a larger policy and system change goal, which I would challenge anyone here that the work you're doing does relate to that, right? It's just about making the connection. So I'm happy to hear that. I'm going to go with Andrea.
Hi, yes, my question is, and I'm sorry if someone's already asked this before, if they have, if you've not submitted the letter of intent, can you include it with the grant, or do we have to submit that? Because some grants you have to and some you don't.
Great question. I believe that's a question for Maisha or Dr. Maxwell, so I'll let them answer.
I'll answer. If you have not submitted a letter of intent, you can still provide a letter of intent with your application if you like, although it is not required for you to submit a letter of intent, but is often encouraged. However, that deadline has already passed. But if you would like to include that with your application, by all means do so.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I believe I had seen Adrienne, your hand was up. I wonder if the question got asked and answered already.
Yes, you answered it. I was going to ask if we needed to wait for approval after our LOI, but we don't, right? Because you could submit it with the application if you wanted to.
Absolutely. Yeah, you do not need permission to move forward with the other aspects and components of your application. So thank you for asking that though, because it's possible other folks on the screen have the same question. Great. So I'm not seeing other questions per se in the chat or on the screen. I do want to, if we can go to the next slide, please. I do want to uplift that we please ask you to submit a survey from today's session. You can either scan the QR code for the English survey that's on the screen, or I'm going to drop once again in the chat the link directly. We really appreciate it. It helps us be better at what we do and make sure that when we're delivering workshops, they're accessible for you all and that they're truly helpful. So I invite you to please share your thoughts. Additionally, if you would like to schedule office hours with me, I just dropped in the chat a Calendly link for the next 2 weeks. It reflects my availability within the next 2 weeks, but if we need to schedule something beyond that, I can definitely am happy to discuss with you. In case you need some support with these aspects or like thinking through some of these things, I'm happy to sit down with you and support. Next slide. And the next slide also just has that link, which I also included in the chat.
One more question.
Did you have a question, Adrienne?
Just real quick. So
Yeah.
are we going to get a summary of this, the PowerPoint in your words? Okay, thanks.
100%, yes. So next steps, please be on the lookout for a follow-up email from us. We will include the PowerPoint slides. We will also include the recording for you all to, so hopefully that's helpful to you all. And we do have about 4 more minutes, so happy to table this time however we would all like. I don't know if there's any other remaining questions or if we feel comfortable ending a little bit early today, but I'll pause and see if there's any additional questions that you all might have for me, for Maisha.
Hi, Donna Watcher from Watcher Growing Corporate. Sorry, I was a little late to the meeting. Are you guys going to schedule another Zoom in the near future? I didn't hear that part. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So it's essentially part one of a three-part series of incubator workshops to help prepare you for drafting your proposal. So today was the first one, and we covered strategic planning and scope of work development. The next one will be on budget setting, and I believe the third one will cover evaluation and measurement. Those dates, I believe, have been shared already. I'm not entirely sure. Maybe the team might have that answer on if we already created the Zoom invitations, but there are definitely some follow-up workshops that we invite you to, and we hope you attend to get you ready for the application.
Okay, unfortunately, I didn't really get an invite to this. If so, it was missed. I was told last minute. Is there any way I can give you my information in the chat and make sure that I am added to the upcoming ones?
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to drop that in the chat. Ruth, my colleague, just shared that our next incubator session will be on Friday, November 7th, again from 12 to 1. So the good news is just for everyone on the call, and we'll make sure to get you those sessions, Donna, is the incubator sessions are scheduled for Fridays from 12 to 1. So it's going to be kind of like the same time that you'll expect to meet with us twice more, and we'll make sure that you are added onto those.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And if I could just ask you to drop your email in the chat, that'd be great, just so we make sure we don't miss you. Um, any other questions? Great. Well, I really want to thank you all for your time this Friday. Very, very hopeful that you found this session to be helpful more than anything, and that you feel more empowered and prepared to draft your proposal. Thank you for your contributions, for your attentiveness, and once again, if you have any other questions for us, please reach out. And if not, we will see you at the next session on November 7th. And the third one, which is scheduled for November 14th, also from 12 to 1. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.